Well, good evening. We're in Proverbs 22 tonight. Proverbs 22, if you want to be turning there. I've asked Ken Ezel if he will to lead us in a prayer, and then we'll start our study together.
Let us pray. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this day you've blessed us with, and all the many blessings you give us that we take for granted. Father, just thankful for this time that we can come worship during the middle of the week, learn more about your word. Just be with Rodney and bless him as he leads our study tonight. Father, this time we just ask for a special blessing on Ukraine and a special blessing on the world, that we can all live in peace. We just pray that the leaders of the countries will look to you for guidance, and that their hearts will be pricked to have care for their fellow man, and that peace can reign in the world again. Father, just thankful for be with the ones that are sick that we know of, those who have lost loved ones. Just be with the church here at Leoma and across the world. Just help us always be true to your word and look to you for guidance. Just thankful for your Son and our Savior, and his sacrifice on the cross, that we can have the hope of heaven with you. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Proverbs 22, verse 1. Heard it all my life. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and favor more than silver or gold. What does the wise man mean by a good name? Sorry. Well, I named all three of my children. They all three have good names because I picked them out. Except for half of the first one. I didn't get by half of that one, but anyway. Her mama got the other half. But so all three of my kids have good names because I gave them to them. Is that what he means? You know better than that. What does he mean by a good name? Reputation. I heard it somewhere. Reputation. Your deeds. Okay? Something that cannot be bought. It's how you live. What do I have back here somewhere? It's good as money in the bank. It's better than money in the bank, right? According to Proverbs 22 and verse 1, it's better than money in the bank because it can't be bought. It is priceless, as the commercial would say. It involves reputation. It involves what you do. It involves character, right? Who you are. Perhaps one of the greatest parallels in our time today, is in our world, is thinking about when you hear a last name, you immediately start thinking something. Now, that may not always be accurate. It may not always be right, but the reality of it is that, did you choose your last name? Furthermore, you didn't choose your first one, did you? But obviously our first names are a little more sporadic. But you say a last name, and thoughts come to mind. Maybe it's somebody you went to school with that had that last name, or maybe it's somebody you did business with. Maybe it's a coworker. If you're retired, it's somebody you worked with, and you hear somebody talking about so-and-so, and and they tell you what their last name. Well, who are they? Well, and they'll tell you their last name. And immediately you start thinking good, bad, honest, dependable, liars, cheaters. You know, if it's somebody, if you're from around here and it's somebody from around here, we get associated by our last names. So think about the value of having a good reputation or a good character. It truly is worth a whole lot more than any monetary value. It is better than money in the bank. But think about with me, what are some of the values to a good name? If it's more valuable than money, how so? Respect. Ooh. See, you can't buy respect. And I tell kids this all the time. You can't demand respect. Now, you may think that you're in a position to where you're an authority and so therefore I can demand you. You cannot demand respect. The only way you get respect is if you earn it. That's the only way. You can't buy it. You can't demand it. Now, you may be in a position of authority and there may be people who are forced to treat you in a different way because you are an authority. But at the end of the day, you can't make them respect you. That is only earned. So yeah, I mean, when you talk about having other people's respect just by your name, just by the name, the reputation that you have, certainly. What is the value of a good name? Trust. Based on your character and your reputation, you're either proven to be trustworthy or not. And again, there's always exceptions to the whole last name thing, okay? There's always exceptions to that, but when you just think about that, when you hear somebody say, well, I let so-and-so borrow something. When you hear their last name, you may be thinking, oh no, why in the world did you let them borrow something? Because in your mind, they're not trustworthy. And it's a character thing, it's a reputation thing. Maybe they've got some history. Again, there's exceptions to that. But maybe they have some history with that person's father or that person's brother or sister or something, you know, and it's left a bad taste. And it's hard to regain trust. Again, trust is not something you can buy. Trust is not something you can demand or require. You have to earn it. What is the value of a good name? Let me ask you, have you ever seen, I don't know if you do this or not, but we do it sometimes because we just think it's fun. We'll Google somebody's net worth. If you've never done that lately, you need to do it. Obviously, it'd be a superstar celebrity, right? I mean, I've never tried to Google mine. Maybe it's out there too. I don't know, but you know, you name a celebrity and you think, I just wonder what they're worth, you know, and you Google their net worth. And we got into this discussion the other night and thought we was going to have to take Callan through some. You can get into some trouble doing that, okay? Because this man would have had this much money if he didn't have this many wives, and he'd given this many wives to this many, and yeah, so Callan's reading all this, right? So 11-year-old, but do you realize that there ain't a tombstone that I know of that has anybody's net worth on it? Not one that I know of. Maybe there's one out there. I guess the rarest tombstone that I know about is over here in Adamsville, Tennessee, and Buford Pusser wanted his vertical instead of horizontal. And it's as tall as he was. And it's vertical. And it's very easy to find and spot in that cemetery because most of them are horizontal, right? This one's vertical. But it still doesn't have, I have never seen one with anybody's net worth on them. But I've seen a whole bunch of them with names on them. Think about what's going to outlast you. And I can tell you it ain't your money. Your money ain't going to outlast you. It's going to be wasted, blown, rot, whatever. But years after you're no longer in this world, your name will still exist. Whether it's good or bad, it's going to still exist. People still going to remember, and when your name gets said, there'll be thoughts that'll come to their mind, whether they're good thoughts or bad thoughts, whether they're right or wrong even. And that's a challenge, right? We don't always, sometimes people have the wrong impression of us. But most likely, whatever our reputation is not only going to be accurate, but it's going to be very memorable. And it will last. Riches will not, but a solid character will. And so as you think about Proverbs 22 and verse 1, I have no doubt that wasn't a new one for anybody. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor rather than silver or gold. So some other translations out there for favor. Anybody got one? Some translations put the word loving in front of it. Am I right? Loving favor. So you have not a different word, but a modifier there for the word. Loving favor is better than silver or gold. What does that suggest to you? To be favored. Okay? Does carry with it the idea of respect, to be well thought of by others. Yes, sir. That's exactly what he said. That's exactly what he said. If you have integrity, nothing else matters. And if you don't have integrity, nothing else matters. That was the exact quote from Kirk Brothers. Yep. And so true. And Proverbs 22 and verse 1 just illustrates that from the wise man. With integrity, as long as you have integrity, as long as you have the favor of others, the reputation and being thought of well, because of the person you are, as a person of integrity, then nothing else matters. I know that we don't live in a political world, and I know that everything is fair and equal. And so I know that nobody ever gets a job because of their last name. But just imagine that we lived in a world that was political, and just imagine that we lived in a world that was unfair, and just imagine that we lived in a world where it mattered not what you know, but who you know. And I'm telling you that your last name may just be what gets you the job. I'm not saying that's always right. I'm just simply saying that we live in that world. And so a good name may bring you blessings that are hard to even measure. And I'm not suggesting that we're out to be blessed, but sometimes we can receive blessings because we are well thought of by others, because our reputation is what it ought to be. Drop down to verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Again, not thinking this one's a new one. Probably heard it most of your life. What do you make of the word train? Teach. What else? Discipline. What else? Example. What else? Repetition. Okay? It's not a one-time process. It's an again and again and again and we just caught this curb out here coming in tonight for the third or fourth time. I don't know how many times the kid's going to have to hit it before she realizes it's there. But it's there, all right? You turn too sharp, there's a sidewalk out there. We may need to put a fence over there so we can tear that corner off. I don't know. You don't just do it one time, right? It takes, and sometimes that's where the greatest training is, right? Is through the repetition of over and over. What does it mean to train? It's an interesting word here in Hebrew. It literally means to dedicate. That's what the word means. To dedicate. So when you think about this idea of dedicating a child, what comes to mind? Daily. All 24 hours. When you rise up, when you lie down, Deuteronomy 6. When you walk by the way, when you sit down, put it on the doorpost. Put it across the lintel there. Put it everywhere for them to see. See how? Well, see through teaching. See through discipline. See through example. See through, it is a repetitious daily the idea of instruction involves time. All of this involves time. It involves an investment. For those of us here that has helped a child to learn how to walk, you don't give up, do you? I mean, you keep on keeping on. You celebrate that first couple steps. Why? Because you spent so much time trying to get this child to walk. And now they've finally turned loose and took 2 steps, and you just celebrate like, they have just won the national championship because they took those 2 steps. Why do you do that? Well, because you've invested into that accomplishment. And they have begun to succeed in that. So you take those first 2 steps and you tell them, well, that's good. Lesson's over. No more walking classes. No, we don't do that. We pick them back up and we say, okay, it's time for 2 more. And 2 more and 2 more. And that's the idea of training, is that we're constantly investing spending the time to get them, as the proverb says here, on the way they should go. Now, what all does that way involve? Train up a child in the way they should go. When you hear the way they should go, what comes to mind?
You work very hard at bringing the best out of them.
Okay? A lot of hard work is put in to finding the best of them, whatever that is, wherever that is. As a parent, you're constantly trying to figure out what that is even. What is their best? What would their best efforts be toward? All kids are different. All children are not alike. So how do you get their best? This one's best. That one's best. What does it mean to train a child in the way? When you hear the phrase, the way they should go, what does that say to you? Morally, spiritually, get them in the way they should go, in the path of righteousness. Yes. Okay? Okay? So we're guiding. We're kind of, the rudder's at the back of the boat and it's behind the boat and it is small in comparison to the boat, but yet it has so much power in directing. And that's and as parents we change our scope as the rudder from time to time. That takes on different roles from when they're young to when they're teenagers to when they're, early adults or adults, and then,
But the one thing that never changes is the example you live in front of them, whether they're 1 or whether they're 71.
Very good.
That example is that dedication of your training of them in following God in everything that you do.
Example is always there, and it is always powerful. It is always important, and you're right, it does. It should not change in any way. Our roles as a child changes some, but who we are, going back to a good name and reputation, and who we are as an example, who we are in terms of instructing, who we are in terms of morality and spiritual things, that doesn't change, shouldn't change. Our children, we're all maturing spiritually, so I hope I'm a little stronger when I'm 75, if I get to be 75, and I hope my kids get to be whatever the age they would be, and they get to see a more mature Christian then than now. But it doesn't change the desire I have today to be the strongest Christian that I can be in front of them today, and admitting my mistakes and learning from them and trying to figure out this way and how to go and the way they should go, and be a lead for them by example, be a rudder for them to guide and help them along the way. Maybe save them some mistakes along the way that I've made, that I've learned from, and but no doubt they've got to make their own mistakes too, and they've got to figure out where the ditches are, and figure out how to navigate life, some on their own, but obviously all of the dedication, the fashioning that I have done to try to help train them in the way they should go will hopefully, when they are old, The wise man says they will not depart from it. Obviously, there's exceptions to a lot of Proverbs. And this one's no different, right? We all know adults today who were raised on the path of morality and spirituality, and they know what's right and what's wrong, and they've chosen to live a different way in rebellion. By and large, though, the rule is that when the tree is, and I have to ask you, when you stop and think about it, you realize that these adult children haven't forgotten how they were raised, right? They may not be living that way. They may be making some different decisions that are not acceptable even to their parents. But if you were to sit them down and ask them, they'd have to lie to you, wouldn't they? If they were going to tell you something else. Because they ain't forgot it. And I think instead of coming here and going, well, now I know so and so, and they've left the way of morality, and so this must be false. And instead of looking at it that way, perhaps it would help us all to realize once you have the foundation, you will always have the foundation. Now, you may choose not to live on top of the foundation, but that's not going to destroy the fact that the foundation's not there. In the same way, if you don't get the foundation really early, you will never have a foundation. And so it will make it difficult in life all the way through. But don't allow people to negate this and say, well, I can give you an example where that's not true, and so therefore that wise saying there must not be accurate. There is hope, and there is peace, and there is assurance for a parent that seeks to train their children the way they should go, realizing that there are exceptions to this. But if we don't, then we can't expect a good outcome, can we? If we don't train, and if we don't lead by example, and if we don't spend time repeating, and if we don't teach and instruct and fashion and mold them, then we certainly aren't going to get a very good product. Verse 9. Whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread with the poor. Any other translations for bountiful eye? A generous eye. Any other translations out there? I'm sorry? A good eye. A good eye. A generous eye. For what purpose? Okay. To be able to see the need of others, to be able to respond to the need of others. A good eye, a generous eye, a bountiful eye will be blessed. Why is that? God does love a cheerful giver. You think God recognizes when someone's eyes are good, generous, bountiful toward those in need? The heart that is willing to share is a heart that will be rewarded by God. That's a principle from cover to cover, isn't it? On the pages of Scripture. God has always warned against selfishness. God has always warned against just being concerned about yourself. God has always been concerned with helping the poor and helping those that are less fortunate and helping those who maybe can't help themselves. Of course, we live in a world of verse 13, don't we? And that makes it hard for verse 9. The sluggard says, there is a lion outside, and I shall be killed in the streets. Who is the sluggard? Lazy? What's another translation out there? Instead of sluggard, it says, okay, it's harmful to others. The slothful person. I have always, trying to be careful here, I just don't do well with laziness. And I just never have. I probably haven't done as well in other areas training my children. And I got to do better in this area too, but laziness is just one that, as I think about reputation, back to verse 1, I'm not sure of anything that ruins a reputation quicker than laziness. I mean, when you know a person to be lazy, that just, very likely you lose all trust, you lose all respect. A person who, you hear what he says here, there's a lion outside. Well, when you flip over to chapter 26 and verse 13, it basically says the same thing. There's a lion outside and I can't go. Here it says, I'll be killed in the streets. It's not likely that there's a lion outside in the streets, you understand? I don't know all the circumstances and situations here. But I'm thinking in my mind he's making excuses. What are you thinking? Man, it's like, I can't go out there today. There's a lion out there. And if there is a lion out there and you go out there, it probably will kill you. That's true. But I'm just thinking that there's most likely not a lion out there. He is a sluggard after all. So that is his mentality. It seems to me that he's making excuses. As you go through the pages of the Proverbs, you remember back in Proverbs 6, the whole ant. Go to the sluggard, you ant, and learn. Talks about the work ethic of the ant and how a lazy man or a slothful man would do well to learn. Proverbs 13 talks about how when you don't give due diligence, basically your hedge grows up. So you become overgrown by your hedge when you don't give. Obviously, there's a lot of illustrations there. Proverbs 19 and verse 24 talks about how quickly poverty or laziness, how quickly when laziness is involved, poverty kind of overruns you. Even to the point that a man would be too lazy to bring the spoon to his mouth. Stick his spoon in the bowl and too lazy to feed himself. Well, I don't know too many people who are too lazy to eat. But in my mind, that's capital laziness right there. Most people are willing to eat and feed themselves. There's several proverbs that refer to the sluggard and the damaging lifestyle that is. Now, there's obviously another extreme here. It's called workaholic. And many of people have ruined themselves spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally by being on the other extreme. There's a good balance somewhere in here. God doesn't want any of us to be workaholics to the point that we break ourselves down or miss out on some opportunities that may be more important. But at the same time, there's no room for laziness either. And so trying to figure out where the balance is and be a person of good reputation when it comes to a work ethic is very important. And the Proverbs have a whole lot more to say about it than those few I mentioned. Verse 15, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. Kind of goes back to verse 6, doesn't it? The idea of training a child. Folly. Will you translate that for me? Folly is bound up in the heart of a child. Foolishness. What's some other words? How about rebellion? You ever notice that a lot of kids just by nature are rebellious? How about selfish? We teach them to be that way, don't we? Because every time they cry, we go running. So what else do you expect? I'm not suggesting that we are born with the sin of Adam. So I don't believe in original sin, you understand? So don't misunderstand me here when what I'm about to say. We are born into a fallen world. And by that, we are impressionable by the... I don't think God creates us flawed. I'm not suggesting that at all. But what I am suggesting is that a child learns very quickly the bad traits. Ain't that amazing? I mean, if you don't believe me, just leave them with the grandparents for a weekend, right? Now, I've made all the grandparents in the room mad. And most of you are grandparents, so good job, right? But my point is that they tend to learn the things and pick up on the things you don't want them to a lot quicker than they pick up on the things you want them to. And it doesn't mean that their nature is flawed or that they're imperfect somehow in the way they're created. I don't believe that. I know there are those that teach that. It just simply means that they're a child. And children are drawn, typically, to selfish, rebellious, foolish ways. And so, even though our political world don't like it, there is a such thing as correction and discipline. And be it a rod, or be it a fly swat, or be it a paint stirrer, or be it a leather belt, or be it a shoe, or... I'm not advocating for abuse, but there are means of discipline, punishment, correction that are not only needed, but are commanded by God. And we can't expect these children to just mature into these perfect, obedient adults if there's not some training and some discipline that goes on. And we've heard Proverbs 22 and verse 15 probably all of our lives as well. And our parents probably use the rod of correction a whole lot more than parents are now. If we're going to produce a good name, there's some things that are needed. And one of those things that is needed is we need to reinforce good behavior and we need to correct bad behavior. And that's the only way that's going to happen. And we just got to figure out what that is and what that looks like for these children that are growing up. Proverbs 23, let's see. What do you want? 13, 14, 19, 20, 29 through 35. 13, 14, 19, 20, 29 through 35. We'll look at those next week, Lord willing.
time to continue our devotional part of our service this evening. We're thankful for everyone that's here. It's a wonderful blessing to be together. We need this time in the middle of the week. We need to study every day, but to be together to study is a blessing. And I'm glad we're able to do this. I appreciate you being here this evening. In our sick this evening, we mentioned Louis Dollar is doing well and will be going back to the doctor Friday. I'm glad to know that. There are others that we've mentioned in the past that are struggling, that need our prayers always. Remember, the daylight savings time starts Sunday. Remember to run your clocks up 1 hour before going to bed Saturday night. Sunday will be the last day to order T-shirts. The order forms are on the table in the front foyer. There will be no late orders. We're sorry to announce the death of Charlotte Perry. This is a friend of Marty Stagg's. The 7th and 8th grade puppets will meet in the annex Sunday, 4 p.m. 7th and 8th grade puppet people will be meeting Sunday, 4 p.m. in the annex. Leading us this evening, Wade Slater will lead our singing. Rodney Livingston will bring us a thought from God's Word in a little bit, and then Max Bottoms will lead us in our closing prayer. Remember, Sunday morning worship at 10:15, Bible classes at 9:30.
If you're using your books and you want to mark the invitation song after our devotional, it's 935 in your book, number 935. We'll sing On Jordan's Stormy Banks, 886. Let's do 1, 3, and 4. On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and pass a wistful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. We will rest in the fair and happy land by and by, just across on the evergreen shore. Sing the song
Our devotional thought tonight will come from Joshua chapter 14. Joshua chapter 14. So as it's been going on for a couple of weeks now, the land is being divided. We got the eastern side of the Jordan River divided out among the 2.5 tribes. And it comes time then in the 14th chapter for the west side of the Jordan River, where the 9.5 tribes were going to dwell. There's this interesting conversation in chapter 14 as Joshua prepares to divide out the inhabitants or the land that they had conquered. To where in verse 6, Caleb comes up and he begins to make his case for an inheritance. He tells of a time when he was 40 years old and he was sent to spy out this land that they were now inhabiting. It had been 45 years ago, roughly 40 of them spent in the wilderness. Now we're 5 past that. Caleb's 85 years old. And he says that he was just as strong then as he was in the day, verse 11, that Moses sent him. So you go all the way back to Numbers 13, and now we're 45 years removed. And Caleb says that his strength has not failed at all. He's just as strong today as he was at age 40. He's making a plea to go get a land that still needed some conquering. And so he's saying that to say, I can still fight. 45 years ago, I said we could do it. I still say we can do it. And I'll take my people and we'll go here to the hill country and we'll do what I said we could do. And I've always been confident that we could. There's a little phrase in chapter 14 that I want you to get tonight. It's found first in verse 8. Caleb speaking, "But my brothers who went up with me made the heart of the people melt." He's talking to Joshua. And you'll remember that Joshua was the only one that stood with him. And he's recounting that occasion where he and Joshua said, we can do it. But he says, you remember what happened. The others convinced them we couldn't. And their hearts melted within them. But I wholly followed the Lord my God. There's the phrase. Caleb says, I wholly followed. W-H-O-L-L-Y. Which was a very H-O-L-Y way to do it, right? In all of God's command, fully, completely, wholly, he says, I followed the Lord my God. As Moses swore on that day, saying, verse 9, surely on the land which your feet have trodden shall be an inheritance for you and for your children forever. Why? Because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. So Caleb goes back with Joshua and says, you remember the day when the others made the people's heart melts? In the Holman commentary, they suggest that Caleb wholly followed the Lord under some great pressure. You remember when these other 10 spies were putting pressure on the Israelites, doubting God, trying to convince them? Yet Caleb said, I never wavered. God said, go take it. I'll be with you. That's what I said we ought to do. Though we were like grasshoppers, God said He'd be with us. The Holman commentary suggests that Caleb had to follow the Lord under some great difficulty. You see, on that occasion in verse 9, Moses looked at him back in Numbers 13. Moses would look at him and say, "This will be your inheritance because you wholly followed the Lord." Now, watch Caleb go into the wilderness from Numbers 13 and miss out on his inheritance for 45 years. All because somebody else didn't do what the Lord told him to do. Can you imagine the difficulty as he watched family member after family member die in the wilderness while he was wholly following the Lord? He buried so many that didn't have to be lost in the wilderness. The difficulty of living out there, and he could have been in this inheritance that Moses had told him he would have. But it wasn't until 45 years later. Verse 14 tells us, "Therefore Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord." Joshua is dividing the land. And Caleb has to go to Joshua to make this request. And so the Holman commentary suggests that Caleb had to wholly follow the Lord under the shadow of another leader. Why wasn't it Caleb that was picked to take the place of Moses instead of Joshua? It's a fair question. Perhaps either could have been picked, but it was Joshua, who was picked by God as the assistant of Moses to take the leadership role. Now it's Caleb asking his colleague for an inheritance. And we see in no way an angst on Caleb's part having to ask Joshua for this. Caleb understood who God had chosen as the leader. And he didn't rebel against that. He followed wholly under the shadow of Joshua. And it could be said that if you read Numbers, Caleb had more to say than Joshua. And so it might be the case that Caleb was actually leading Joshua to be the one to stand firm on that occasion. Now the roles are somewhat reversed. But it doesn't change anything about the desire of Caleb to wholly follow the Lord. And so I don't know what you're under tonight. I don't know what pressure you may be under. I don't know what difficulty you may be under. I don't know what shadow you may be under. It may be unfair. It may be ungodly. It may be unrighteous. It may be terrible. It may be political. It may be prejudiced. It may be, I don't know what it may be. But all I can offer you is the example of Caleb. Whatever you do, wholly follow the Lord. And the inheritance will be rightly given. So tonight, if you can't describe your life with that phrase as one who is wholly following the Lord, I beg you to get things right before the time comes for our inheritance to be received. Because I want to be able to say, as Caleb could say, all these years I've followed God. and I will continue to follow God. And I hope the same for you. If you need to come tonight, would you come as we stand and sing?
Sinners Jesus will receive from this word of grace to all, through the heavenly pathway lead, all will linger on the wall, singing, "Oh, at your right hand, Christ receive the sinful sin, make amends."
There's no other announcements. We'll close with He Has Made Me Glad, 103 in your books. Lads Song Leaders, 5 p.m. Sunday evening again, right here. No,
I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts with praise. I will say this is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice, for he has made me glad. He has made me glad. He has made me glad. I will rejoice, for he has made me glad. He has made me glad. He has made me glad. I will rejoice, for he has made me glad.
Dear Lord, thank you for another beautiful day. Thank you for everybody that came here tonight to worship you in spirit and truth. Lord, thank you for the songs that were sung. Thank you for the lesson, Lord. I pray that it will be with us and we'll apply it to our lives. Lord, I pray that you'll be with this country as we are going through some tough times. I pray that they'll look to you to make good decisions, wise decisions. Lord, I pray that you'll watch over us throughout the night tonight and keep us safe and be with us as we depart from here. In Christ's name, pray. Amen.